Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are excited as the Office of the Clerk and Recorder to be joined by these three esteemed members of the City Council to talk to the students on the Auraria campus. We're joined by members of staff from MSU and students from UCD who will introduce themselves and lead this discussion around our charter review and the ways of leadership and community engagement in ways you as a campus, as students and faculty can interact with the City Council and the Office of the Clerk and Recorder and in your community.
Well, thank you so much, Danielle. I guess I can kick it off and introduce myself as a representative here on campus. I'm finishing up my time on campus as a student, but that does not mean that I will be gone for very long. I'm very excited to stay involved as an alum. My name is Fabian Laguna. I'm the Vice President of the Student Government Association at CU Denver, and I'm studying a master's in international business. I've only been in this position for a year, but I certainly have been involved in student government in my undergraduate career with CU Boulder and was involved the year prior to being vice president as well. So I'm very excited to be here with these esteemed members of our city council and members of the county clerk and recorder, and I'd love to hear about their experiences as well. So I'll just hand it off. I guess I'll just pick a name here to hand it off to Paul to introduce himself, and then Paul, you can just pass it off to somebody else to introduce themselves.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm Paul Lopez. I serve as the county clerk and recorder. It's basically the chief elections official for the county. It is an elected position. I oversee elections in Denver, the city clerk, records and documents, all of the stewardship of the Denver Charter, the ordinances and contracts, and also recordings and marriages, things like deeds of trust happen through us as well too. And the other arm of our agency, our independent agency, is I also serve as the public trustee for the city and county of Denver. That is ensures the public oversight of the foreclosure processes through the county. One of the only state left that has a third party, being the public, that oversees that.
I'll go next.
A whole lot.
Do I tag somebody in?
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I'll go next.
Yeah.
Since I am your city councilwoman for the Auraria campus, my name's Councilwomen CdeBaca. I represent District 9. I am a lifelong East Sider and live in the northern part of my district in Swansea, but represent all of our residents up to the southern tip, which is our Auraria campus. So glad to be here today. Have worked very deeply with the Auraria campus in my previous life and am all about co-governance. So excited to have this conversation today. I'll tag in Jamie.
Thank you. My name is Jamie Torres. I represent Council District 3, which across the street from Auraria campus is Loma Lincoln Park, which is part of District 3. And I go west to West Colfax and then south, including Villa Park, the 2 Barnum neighborhoods, Westwood, and the top half of Marley. This is also the area that I'm born and raised West Sider in Denver. And prior to joining City Council in 2019, I was founder and director of our Denver Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, and actually got my master's on Auraria campus at CU Denver in medical anthropology. So really, really happy to be here with you all. I'll kick it to Councilwoman Sandoval.
Thank you, Councilwoman Torres. Amanda Sandoval. I represent Northwest Denver, District 1, which includes part of West Colfax, which I share with Councilwoman Torres, Jefferson Park, which is just across I-25 from Auraria campus, Sloan's Lake neighborhood, West Highland neighborhood, Sunnyside, Berkeley, Regis, and Chaffee Park. I was born and raised in Northwest Denver, where I'm currently representing. I got my degree at Metro in political science and Chicano studies, so it's great to be back on campus. My daughter currently is attending CCD, so it's good to be here and be representing and be on this panel with all of you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for those introductions. It's definitely exciting to be here with all of you that represent such cool parts of Denver. I'm definitely biased towards the east side because that's where I live. But either way, all of the parts that you represent are certainly parts that I spend a lot of time in and are important to all of us. It's also really, really cool to hear that some of you have been on campus, previously getting your education. And I think, hope it's as inspiring to other students as it is to me to hear that and to feel like, that's something that we can strive to do as well, is to be sitting in the seats that you are all sitting in today. So along those same lines, I'd love to hear from all of you how you got involved, in public service and what made you decide to run for office. Because I know it's definitely probably not an easy decision, but I'd love to hear what motivated you and what got you involved in the first place. Maybe since I'm biased towards the east side, I'll start with Candy.
Awesome. Well, this is actually my favorite thing to talk about, especially with young people, because my career in politics started long before I realized it. When I was a student in high school at Manual High School here in Denver and the East Side, we were kind of the guinea pigs for the education reform movement. And we were the first school that experienced a co-location and subsequently a shutdown. And I got very politicized in my sophomore year of high school because our school went from being a traditional high school to 3 schools over a summer, and none of us had input over that. And so, we were fighting for honors classes and electives and really basic things that we lost in that transition. And, we didn't know we were engaged in politics, or we didn't know it was civic engagement that we were doing. But it translated later to fighting to keep the school open, organizing community to sue the school district. And that kind of was what catalyzed my career and interest in policy. I was fortunate enough to move out to DC and practice policy at the federal level. I'll come back to Denver, practiced at the state level, and then went back to my roots, which was an organization that was birthed out of the shutdown of Manual at Project Voice. And my kids, my students, they are really the people who asked me over and over to run for office to represent them, to make sure that their advocacy efforts were not falling on deaf ears. And so I threw my hat in the ring and here I am. That's my story.
That's an awesome story. I mean, if your kids are asking you to do it, then it's probably pretty hard to say no sometimes. So, but also, hearing that experience in Manual, I have some of my best friends went to Manual, and I had no idea that there were those organizing efforts going on in your generation. So I definitely tell that to my friends, and I'm sure they're going to appreciate your story. I don't think a lot of them know about it. I'd love to hear, let's see, maybe from Jamie next.
Yeah, it was an unexpected path for me. It wasn't something that I think I saw myself in when I was even in college or as a young adult. But as I look back at it now, I think everything that I was exposed to, what I was starting to feel like was really important to me and to my neighbors and my family in West Denver, was starting to kind of build these blocks toward needing to be more civically involved, wanting to know more about what was happening in my city, and needing to and feeling like I needed to have a voice in that. So I think this goes back in terms of my own inspiration to my grandmother, who that connection point to the East Side is very real. East Side and West Side roots run interconnected. They run very deep. That was where my grandmother was born. Her family then moved to Auraria campus when it was actually a neighborhood. She attended Mass and choir at St. Cajetan's Church there. She married my grandpa at that church, and they ended up moving to the West Side and raising their family there. But her experience through school was really what pushed me into immigrant and refugee work, which was the start of me feeling like there's a voice needed at the city level. And it was her experience being disciplined for speaking Spanish. So our language lines got cut, they got severed at that point. She didn't speak it to her kids. We never learned it growing up, apart from school. And the disadvantage and the loss of that is severe. And so watching kind of our immigrant and refugee communities start to pass through some of the same assimilation pathways felt really damaging for the future of Denver and for their own families. And so pushing the city toward establishing an office and then really working on policy to make sure that we were welcoming in not just name only or motto only, but actually doing stuff that worked to protect those families was what really opened my eyes to this is a role that I need to try to enter into. And so that was when, you know, I started looking at this role. And fortunately for me, I had really wonderful ground that had been laid before me from Ramona Martinez and Rosemary Rodriguez and Clerk Lopez that had been council members and representing District 3 before I got into the seat. And they were also supportive and such champions. And so that really helped me along as well.
It's wonderful to hear the different connections too, you know, in the East and West Side. And then also just Auraria campus has been a vibrant, you know, place of life ever since, you know, the beginning of time or whenever humans arrived to these areas. And so definitely also acknowledging that this land is certainly a land that has meant a lot to a lot of different people. And I hope that it continues to pay justice to, you know, the people that have been on this land. But regardless, I appreciate that story a lot, Jamie. Thank you. I'll move on to Amanda.
Thank you, Fabian. So I was born and raised in Northwest Denver, and by the time I was born, my father was already a state senator in Northwest Denver, Paul Sandoval, and he worked on the 1975 Bilingual Bicultural Act, which brought bilingual bicultural education to Colorado. And so I grew up around politicians, and I also grew up around activists. My mom ran a small nonprofit in Northwest Denver called the Neighborhood Housing Service, which helped get people loans because Northwest Denver had been historically redlined. So I grew up in the world of nonprofit providing housing with my mom, and I grew up with my dad talking to politicians, and he owns a restaurant in Northwest Denver it used to be called La Casa de Tamales. He and my mom started it in 1975. And so I grew up around a restaurant and having a lot of conversations. I never knew anything different. And if you ask if I wanted to become involved in politics, it was no. I saw how it impacted my father personally. I saw how hard it was and how challenging it was. I always just thought I would go on and I would start franchising La Casita with my dad, and we would have tamales all over Colorado, and that was my game plan. And I was not a traditional student. I had 2 children. I had my daughter when I was 23, and I stayed home for 10 years. I worked at La Casita part-time, but it was not my full-time job. My full-time job was raising my children. And so I actually, being untraditional, I went back to school. My dad pushed me back to school, and education was key. And similar to Councilman Torres's story, he grew up in the East Side. He went to Annunciation High School. All my family went to Annunciation High School. My grandpa was a meat packer at Cudahy Meat Packing in Globeville. My grandma was a farm worker. She picked pinto beans in Brighton, and they lived a humble life. And Spanish was he was not able to speak Spanish at school. It was told it was the devil's language, and he had marks. All my aunts and uncles and my dad actually had scars on their hands from the nuns hitting them on the hand with rulers as they spoke Spanish. So Spanish was a lost language in my household and was not passed forward. Luckily, I was able to speak some at La Casita with all of our tamaleros, so I can understand it. And then life, as it happens unpredictably, my father got really sick and got pancreatic cancer and passed away. Right in the same year I graduated. He passed away April 24th, and I graduated from Metro May 13th on Mother's Day. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And Councilwoman Judy Montero, who used to represent Council District 9, the boundaries looked very different. That was in 2015 or 2012. And she used to represent Auraria campus, La Alma Lincoln Park, Baker, part of the north side, part of the east side, and part of the west side. And she came in and said, apply for a job. I have a job as a council aide. And I said, oh no, I don't know how to do that. And she said, yes, you do. You know the people. That's half the battle, Amanda. You know the people in the neighborhood, and you're a trusted resource. And so I applied, and I worked in a council office. I worked for Councilwoman Montero until her term was done in 2015. And then I went on to work for my predecessor, Councilman Espinosa, and I helped set up his office and helped get him going. And then I decided I didn't want to work in council anymore. And I started working for the fire department, and I was going to totally change careers. And my predecessor, when I left his office, he asked me to run, that he did not want to run. And I said, I don't think I want to do that. I don't think. And he said, you were running my office. You were already doing it. So I knew how much my running for office would impact my 2 children and my husband. So we sat down as a family and we talked about it, and we talked about what it would look like to support me to run. And it was late in the game. The election was in May of 2019, and I was barely deciding in December of 2018. And with the support of my family, I told my kids and my husband, each of you have a veto. If one of you don't want to support me, I will not do it. It has to be a family group event. And they were all in, and I was in a race and I won. And I have to say, it's one of the most challenging and yet rewarding jobs that I have had to date. And I love the work that I do. And yeah, I'm challenged every single day to rise to the occasion and even do more.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you so much for that, Amanda. And it's really also, from my perspective, so informative to hear about your family's experiences, all of you, your families, and the ways that, they've helped build you to these moments of being able to sit in these chairs. Also, as a first generation American, it's really cool to hear stories of immigrants that have been here for generations, and what kind of experience that I don't necessarily hear about from my family, but I love to learn about and understand, how, Latinx communities have been part of this land for generations. So thank you so much. We'll finish off with Paul, and then I have a question specifically for you, Paul, about your job right after this. Oh, you're Charlie Chaplining us.
That's not Charlie Chaplin. I don't know what it is. I can't. Well, I appreciate that, and thank you. And yes, these are some beautiful stories, and you're seeing that there's a lot of ties, right? We all have very similar experiences. Some a little more different than others, but we're all from this city, right? We're all from these neighborhoods. Some of us either through almost all DPS, or even on the Auraria campus. I was a student on the Auraria campus for 5 years, and I worked 3 jobs to get it done, right? And I could say it's just this spirit of participation, right? I was 13 years old, and I was 13 years old knocking on doors to rename a school after an individual, Representative Castro at the time. And I remember feeling it being almost revolutionary at the time, because there was no schools named after people like us. It didn't reflect who we were out there in Westwood. And, going door to door as a very awkward, skinny, squeaky voice 13-year-old in middle school, kind of forced me to interact with people, right? And also understand that there's just something about who we are and what we represent and where we come from that needs to have voice, right? I later, went on to, I graduated from West High School in 1997. Wasn't the best student, but I wasn't the worst. I was actually just bored, right? And there was a lot of things that would interest me, but I never got really plugged in the way I did when I was in college. I ended up, going through pre-collegiate. I hurt my knee playing baseball, so I couldn't do that. I ended up, being at the Auraria campus through pre-collegiate and graduating from UCD, but I almost dang nearly dropped out. One, because I had to fund it all myself. I had to work for every single dollar in tuition. I wasn't prepared, so I lost my scholarship that I had from an entity, and I just had to work, right? And little by little, and one of the things that I realized was I felt alone on the campus, even in a campus right literally down the street from where I lived. I'm from the West Side. And I couldn't feel more alone or more alienated on a campus that was once our neighborhood. And so I joined Mecha and eventually ran for student government, which was a little different at the time. It was hard. It was the first time that, I did anything like that. I fell in love with organizing outside. So I was, pouring drinks as a bartender, being a bus boy, being a janitor, doing all kinds of odd jobs and doing organizing. And I just fell in love with that. And I became a union organizer. I represented janitors in the Denver metro area, fought for them to make sure that they and their families were at the bargaining table. And then literally one day it was just driving down Federal Boulevard and realizing, coming from another part of town during construction, we have winter, spring, construction, and then fall, right? And so, and just realizing that there's just two different Denvers, and it's not right. And it's not going to change unless we do something about it, unless we participate, right? And it's scary. It's scary taking that leap. It's scary putting your name out there, being open to criticism, for better or for worse. And I had the honor to represent and fight for my district for 12 years, a kid from the barrio. And now, as clerk and recorder, as the chief elections official for the county, I get to ensure and make sure that we're doing everything possible so that people can participate in this democracy and vote or knock on doors or help register people to vote. And it couldn't have been more serendipitous and more poetic justice for a kid from the West Side to be able to oversee the elections in such a consequential year, with the stakes couldn't have been more higher, and with under the most difficult of circumstances, with the pandemic of COVID, the pandemic of racism that's been reanimated, and also the pandemic of misinformation and lies to try to keep us from the ballot. So yeah, like I said, it's not unique. We have a lot in common.
Yeah, thank you for that background, Clerk Lopez. Also just hearing your experience makes me super happy and proud to have you representing us in the position that you sit in right now. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what the clerk and recorder does, and maybe how your role can help impact the communities that you're mentioning, and how you're maybe using your role to create more equity within the processes that we have for whether it's elections or otherwise.
No. So literally 4 major divisions that under our agency, the clerk and recorder and a lot of other counties has been independently elected for quite a while. Denver, it was appointed by the mayor until 2007, right? When we had our first elected clerk and recorder. The clerk and recorder basically oversees 4 major functions for the county, right? You have the city and county of Denver. This is where the county stuff comes in. And one, it's the oversight of our elections. Like, we literally run the elections, and we do this in conjunction with the state and federal government, and also local governments as well too, like DPS, to make sure that we can ensure easy access to the ballot. Denver happens to be the gold standard for the rest of the country for this state It is no coincidence that the All-Star game came to Denver, and MLB actually picked Denver, being a completely different model and opposite. It couldn't be more opposite than some of the nefarious Jim Crow era laws that they're passing in Georgia. They passed in Georgia. I got to tell you that so the election side is a huge part of it, but it's also in partnership with a few other functions that we do. The recording side, so recording like marriage licenses, your deeds of trust, documents that are public documents, documents that are military discharge. We are the steward of a lot of that. You'll see we have a lot of throwback Thursdays, and we have a lot of interesting documents that go back hundreds of years. So to preserve and have be the steward of. The second is city documents, our charter, our laws, our ordinances, the contracts that city council votes on and approves or doesn't approve. We are the proclamations, the resolutions. We are the steward of that information. You can find all that online if you go to denverclerkandrecorder.org. So, and the other thing is we fulfill the duties of the public trustee. In a lot of other counties, the public trustee is the treasurer, the elected treasurer. In Denver, we actually got it right. The public trustee is the clerk and recorder. So the switcheroo is that I'm not responsible for the DMV stuff, making license plates and doing that kind of registration, thank God. But we do oversee the foreclosure process. And like I described before, Colorado is one of the only remaining entities where that process is a publicly overseen process. Usually it's a third party. And that goes back to days where people getting swindled for their land. And I think we still see a lot of swindling over land. So we want to make sure that our people, our residents in Denver are properly, they're properly represented and making sure that the process is fair. So that's essentially what we do, but we can't do it without your participation, right? We can have the best election model in the world, and we do in the country. But if it doesn't work, if you don't participate, if you don't register to vote, if you don't keep up at it, if you don't, be part of that 86% that we've seen, and we're actually changing the way people vote and where we're focused on. And my administration is focused on making it even easier, but also more accessible, because it makes no sense if you have an easy access model in one part of the city, but not the other. So we've expanded our drop boxes, expanded the number of VSPCs, to look beyond the data and also into some of these neighborhoods that for the longest time have been ignored and still continue to see a lot of challenges in terms of being drawn into this very segregated city when you look at it.
Thank you very much for that answer there. I certainly appreciate what was done this year for the elections. It was never easier for me to vote. Like, it was the easiest experience I've ever had, and certainly appreciate the early voting opportunities, and hopefully we can continue this leadership for the nation down the line.
And Fabiana, if you might want to put a plug in the chat, or Cassie, one of our folks can put a plug in the chat. You go to denvervotes.org, sign up for Ballot Trace. It is a new platform now. We had part 2 of Ballot Trace 2.0. It creates a platform for you to make sure that even though you think you're registered, make sure that the address and the contact information is right. And we could update you as the election unfolds, right? We have an election coming up in November, the coordinated election. So look forward to your participation.
Absolutely. And like you said, the most important thing is us participating and showing up. But certainly Ballot Trace was awesome too. I could see as soon I got an email when my ballot was received, it was very reassuring. So I appreciate that. So we're gonna move over to the council members. I would love to hear, about what the city council does in more detail, and how these roles can impact the lives of the people in our communities. And I don't mean to I see that Candy has unmuted. She already knows I'm going to pick her. So
East Siders, man, this is an East Side game, man.
Okay, it's okay. I'm not shy, and this is important. And so I love to teach people about what City Council does, because I think we have massive misinformation or expectations about what council does. And we're not educated well in school. When we learn about government and how government functions, we often only learn about the federal level. And so we learn about the Constitution and the 3 separate branches of government at the federal level. And we don't learn how those actually translate down at multiple levels. So you have the same exact thing at the state level, you have the same exact thing at the city level. At the city level, our version of our Constitution is our city charter. Our function as city council is the legislative branch of government. The mayor is the executive branch of government, and we have courts that perform our judicial duties at the local level. And so in that split, different cities do it different ways, and they give their executive branch and their legislative branch different powers. But here in Denver, we have a very strong executive branch. And so what that means is city council really has one job, and our job is legislation. We make the ordinances, and included in our legislation is approval of our budget and the expenditures within that budget. And so every Monday night we have city council and we vote basically on how we're spending the dollars within our budget, and if anybody is proposing new legislation. It's important to note that city council doesn't often put forward a lot of legislation, and we don't often reject contracts. And so that's kind of why you hear a lot about the rubber stamp role of city council, because most of what comes to us is coming from the executive branch of government, and we're either approving or denying. And we deny very little and way less before we got here. Before we got to council, I think we had not rejected a single contract. And we had also, of 1,000 bills that had come through or that had been processed through the city council the year before I came into office, less than 9 of them were initiated by city council. So it's important to know the difference between authority and influence, because legislation is all that we have authority over. We do, however, have influence, but when people call us for the potholes and the street signs, we don't have any authority over those things at all. We have influence to track down who's responsible and try to make it happen, but authority and influence are 2 very separate things. And I invite my colleagues to jump in and talk a little bit more about within legislation, what you all believe we have roles on.
I can jump in. One of the things that I feel like we're uniquely positioned to do, because we do represent districts and neighborhoods, is the strong connection to residents. And there are any number of times when, either as a resident, I felt frustrated with my city, with response, with feeling like our issues were heard, and as a city employee, recognizing we need better connectivity to those residents. When I ran the Immigrant and Refugee Affairs Office, we were constantly facing issues with language access, and city departments who were doing things differently based on what that department wanted to do, or what those employees within the department were empowered to do. And as I come into city council, it becomes a priority for me to do something differently and establish something new for the city when it comes to language access. So there is kind of that policy path, but it's definitely derived from what are we hearing from the communities that we represent and the neighbors that we represent. Where are they getting their information? And that couldn't have been a more powerful issue to face than this past year in the pandemic, when we had to fight for public health orders in Spanish and other languages, when we still have to fight for websites to be up to date in those languages. There is a tragic gap of information when it comes to non-English speakers, and for things that affect them financially, quality of life, all of the public health situations, there is an absolute responsibility for us to be advocating heavily to make sure that every single resident in the city has the ability to access information in the same way. But we also know that things that happen in District 3 might be very different from things that happen in District 11, which is Montbello and Green Valley Ranch. And those residents need a point of contact. They need a warm voice to call and talk to about what they might be seeing or experiencing, or if they're feeling like nobody's responding to a question that they've raised or a concern. And it could be their trash, it could be their block, could be a roadway, and it could absolutely be overlooking and not paying attention to the district. Clerk Lopez carried forward and finished work that had been decades long to get alleys paved in West Denver. So we're talking about actual infrastructure and the look and feel and the access of our neighborhoods, that city council members play a huge role in saying this is a priority to get West Denver the connectivity that it needs. And so that becomes a huge area for us as council members to serve constituent needs. And when I say constituents, it's not just the people who voted me into office, it's everyone who lives in that district, whether they voted for me or whether they can't vote at all. So those are things that really matter at our level as well.
Thank you. And yeah, clearly you have a very big impact on our lives. And I encourage everyone when they can to attend the meetings on Monday nights. It's certainly nice to see your familiar faces there. Amanda, if you'd like to add anything, I'll let you, but I'll also just quickly add in a question so you guys can continue discussing. I want everyone to learn about the charter review process and learn about why it's being reviewed and how they can continue to be engaged in that process. So yeah, we'll start with you, Councilwoman Sandoval.
Yeah, so not only are we city council members, we're land use commissioners. So for the past 9 years, I really studied land use, and Northwest Denver is super close to the central business district. And a lot of the egregious building forms that you see throughout Denver that people don't like have actually started in Northwest Denver and come out of Northwest Denver. So what I've really done is, I think I'm the only council office ever to hire an in-house land use planner. So instead of having a traditional office where I have 3 council aides, I actually have 1 full-time land use planner in my office that I have on staff. So some of the things, I've taken a bit of a different approach. I've been able to be more proactive when it comes to zoning, because I really feel like that's where, especially for people of color, that's your biggest investment, would be your home, if you're able to buy a home. And a lot of times when we go to meetings about land use, the land use planners don't speak in terminology and use terms that people understand. And people don't understand what the bulk plane means. People don't understand what the side interior setback means. People don't understand what MX means, or MS, Main Street. So I've really focused on land use and I really don't want to see public hearings in Northwest Denver where neighbors are pitted against each other. I inject myself in conversations with developers and neighbors, and I'm a mediator, and I really play that mediation role. I also have been able to rezone entire neighborhoods to allow accessory dwelling units in them. It's the first time that a whole entire neighborhood has been rezoned by a council person to allow accessory dwelling units to have a different type of housing stock in Denver. And for those who may not know, an accessory dwelling unit is the ability to build a house detached or attached and rent it out or live in it on top of your garage or not the primary structure. And so I've also been able to work on overlays. I've also been able to change the name of Columbus Park to La Raza Park, which the neighborhood has been calling La Raza Park since I grew up. I never even knew it was called Columbus Park. So in the city and county of Denver, we never, ever have to call Columbus Park. We never have to say that name again. And whether people agree with the term La Raza, it's what the community's been calling it. So I have taken just a little bit slightly different role. I do vote on budgets, I do bring policy, but I really think the biggest impact that I can make in Northwest Denver is continue to talk about land use and continue to advocate for people who don't understand land use and are intimidated by developers, and be able to be that person, a trusted voice, to be able to negotiate different type of outcomes for people who are wanting to stay in Northwest Denver because gentrification has happened and displacement has happened. And that's just something that I've learned. I haven't gone to school to learn about land use. I have just stayed up late at night. I've sat with architects and said, I don't understand this. Draw it out for me. What would the unintended consequences of this zone district, what could we build there? And then I'm able to communicate that to my neighborhood so that we have different type of outcomes. And through that process, I'm able to get more community benefits. Because when you're changing the entitlement of a land, you want something for the community. And I know that it's not the traditional role of a council person to get so involved in land use, but it's something that makes sense to me. And it's something that we've gotten really good wins in Northwest Denver.
And certainly a very important topic to educate all of us on, Councilwoman Sandoval. So I appreciate you dedicating yourself to that, because I personally, I'm very interested in protecting land rights and making sure that we maintain the fabric of our community, but we need to know, how to talk the talk in order to confront these issues. So I appreciate you being that facilitator and mediator. So I'm gonna kind of bring back to a question that I mentioned earlier, and I'd love to help students learn a little bit more about the charter review and just what the implications of this process are. I'm still kind of confused about the city charter and how that all kind of is going to impact us as community members. And if we can try to answer as quickly as possible, because we still have a few other questions, but I'll just open it up to whoever feels the most confident to answer that.
So let me, if you don't mind, let me start with that. So here's the purpose of our office convening the Charter Review Committee is twofold. One, as Denver has, and as elections have completely modernized in the way we select our leadership, and how we vote, and moving from polling places to having a mail-in ballot and with 3 different options on how to return it and vote. And as the state has changed to reflect this, particularly through House Bill 1303, every single county in Colorado has the same kind of parameters in how we cast our ballots. However, Denver's charter is a little antiquated when it meets up with this. And it wasn't more obvious than this past municipal election cycle, in which everybody that you see here was on the ballot. I had a very close race that nearly went into recount territory. And had that happened, we would have been very close as a county to coming out of compliance with state law. One, because of the shot clock and the timing of the election, and the timing in which council members need to be seated, and elected officials need to be seated. Second, because of the fact that you have only 30 days now for elections to be able to determine who's on the ballot, make sure that there's no typos, design that ballot, send that ballot to our vendor for printing. They print all of our materials, it comes back to Colorado, and then it gets mailed out. That's cutting it close already if you're here in Denver. But if you are one of those voters who we call our UACAVA, overseas voters, that's even less of a time frame for you to be able to vote, fill out that ballot, mail it back, and get it into our office in time. And so what that does is it creates 2 separate voting systems and 2 separate classes of voters. And it shouldn't. Our model should work. Everybody should have the same amount of time to deliberate on who they see best as being their leadership. So what I did is I convened a panel of elections experts, people who have been around the block in terms of what we do, to really analyze how we resolve this issue but then the different ways that we can resolve this issue. And these are folks who, from city council, the mayor's office as one appointee, community. We made sure that we went through 7 meetings on how to analyze the different ways that we can solve for this. The easiest path forward is just to move the election from May to April and to allow that shot clock and remain in compliance. However, there are different ways that we can solve this issue. And now that we're at it, we decided to engage the public to make sure that we have your input and how to help us determine this, right? And see what you're comfortable with. The questions that we asked were plurality versus majority. And that meaning that in some cases, like in Aurora, rather than having your representative be elected by 50% plus 1 votes, that they have a majority to take office, it can be 30% based on however many other people are in the race. The other thing is, the question is the timing of elections. Do we continue to have this in May as we traditionally have, or do we move it to November to pair with an off-cycle coordinated election, which we would have the municipal races? The other way around it is the kind of model in which we use to cast our ballots and to tabulate, right? And one of those being approval voting. Instead of literally voting for one in each race, you can vote for multiple, right? Whoever you like in that race, and we just tabulate it at the end. The other model is also what's called ranked choice voting, where you rank your choices, and then we go around in a couple different rounds to determine that first, second, and third, and then it kind of winds down to whoever has the most votes based off of their first, second, or third vote. So I think, it's exactly what it says. It's a ranked choice, and instead of voting for one, you would say, I vote for this person first, then I like this person, and then the third, right? And then we go and tabulate, and at the end of the day, you have a different model in which to vote. I don't do that unilaterally. I want to make sure that we have folks involved, and we've partnered with the city council, because at the end of the day, the city council has the task of either voting or not, and choosing which, what ends up on the ballot. That is a legislative function. We provide the recommendations based off of operations and budget and the best ability that we can do, and the most viable options. And then what I will end up doing is, we are now we had our final meeting. Those commissioners have sent their recommendations. We're still gathering that information and input from things like surveys that we've had, where we've had nearly 1,000 respondents. The engagement and outreach team that I brought to this show and to this level of work, basically bringing good old fashioned organizing up in here to get out, capture that sentiment and that input. We're compiling a lot of that, and also we're working internally to see what problems may exist with each and every single one of these recommendations that we could possibly put into law. And because it's the charter, this is going to be put on the ballot as a referendum for you as voters to vote on this November. So that's the process.
Thank you for that, Clerk Lopez. That helped me understand better what's going on. We this year changed our constitution in student government. We had to put it to a vote. But I also appreciate that you're not putting a prescriptive solution, and you're going out and speaking to stakeholders and understanding what the implications of changing the voting system are. And I think it's also speaks to our innovative kind of approach as a city, that we are willing to explore new avenues of voting, which is exciting.
And one of the things, if I might add, is that our model is always based off of what's voter centric. It's not our business. It's not my business as the person who's in charge of the elections, of the chief elections officer, to know how you vote or care how you vote or the outcomes, right? Our business is to make sure that you have equal access to the ballot box, and the easiest way to cast a ballot, as opposed to some other places you've been reading about that just keep thinking of other barriers to put in front of you. And this is one of those processes.
Well, it's reassuring to hear that that's our position here in our city. It makes me even more proud to live in this city. All of you, thank you. So I have one more question for the Councilwoman and Clerk Lopez. If you could each maybe answer individually. It's a two-part question. I'm kind of trying to fit everything in together. So the first part of the question is how can people who are not eligible to vote still be involved and help in community organizing. So that's the first part. And then the second part is about, people that might be very frustrated with the system right now and are going out to protest and are feeling very, disenfranchised. What can we do differently or better to keep people like that engaged in a productive way? And maybe we'll start with Councilwoman Torres.
Sure, happy to. Everything for me is at a local kind of impact level. So I think if you're connected or can connect to the nonprofits that are doing good work in your neighborhood and churches that are doing good work in your neighborhood, if you can't vote, those are some of the ways that you can get involved in really specific projects that really start to make a difference in the lives of families that live there. There are also just some incredible organizations. When I was doing mostly immigrant and refugee work, the Immigrant Advocacy Network is big and it is strong, and there are a number of ways to get involved in advocating for national legislation, for statewide legislation, and for local legislation. And that runs the gamut for folks of different statuses, of different ages, that can be a really great kind of pathway into really understanding what an individual impact can look like on those legislative systems. So that would be my recommendation, is kind of looking around you and saying, okay, who do I connect to right here where I live to start to make a difference right here, and follow that passion path, because it could be neighborhood beautification, it could be elections, it could be policy, and there is somebody who's working on that, and so that I think becomes a really great kind of energy space. I get emails from students at Regis on the Auraria campus who want to know more about an issue, and that's a great way to open up a conversation with your legislator. Find out who your local legislators are and ask them for a conversation about something that's important to you, and do the research and have something to offer. I think feedback, real life experience, all of that really matters to us as we're trying to figure out what's our path forward on something.
Thank you, Councilwoman Torres. And I also just will kind of add that I think I'd love to hear also from anyone else about ways that, people that want to be engaged with the community that don't speak English would still have access to do so as well. Just, I was reminded by your work that you mentioned earlier, Councilwoman Torres. So maybe we'll hand it off to Councilwoman Sandoval to speak about these different questions that I brought up.
Thank you. So one way you can, which I don't know if everybody knows, but you can pre-register to vote. So my daughter was 17 and she had registered to vote before she was able to vote at 18. And so when she was able to vote at 18, it made a big difference. She was already registered to vote. So for anybody out there who has kiddos, make sure when you're 17 that you're registered to vote. So the next election, you get a ballot. A ballot came in the mail, and my daughter was able to vote for the presidential election, and she was so excited. And she had all her friends pre-registered to vote. So I think that's really important. And another thing is sometimes government doesn't speak to everyone. Politics doesn't speak to everyone. So find your passion. Your passion could be nonprofit. Your passion can be schools. Your passion can be land use. Your passion could be anything. And if you have that passion and the drive, I know there's other people out there who want to do it. A lot of times, what I think, especially for college students, what I did was I did internships. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I tried an internship. I did all kinds of different internships. I was the president of the Political Science Association at Metro State University. So I did all kinds of different internships and explored what did I actually want to do when I got into my field in my profession. And I think that finding a mentor, finding someone that you can go to, finding someone that you can rely on, someone that can guide you My mentor happened to be Dr. Hazan from the political science department. He since has retired, but oftentimes after I graduated, I would call Dr. Robert Hazan and sit down and talk to him and ask him different questions. And he always gave me great advice that came from a different perspective than I had, and was very thoughtful and pushed me to get better outcomes and held me accountable oftentimes. So I think being able to mentor and then being able to be a mentor. Oftentimes when I find my daughter's having a hard time, I'll ask her who one of her professors is that she could talk to, who's one of the people that she can reach out to really make a difference in her community. And for people who are protesting, I think it's great to protest. I think it's great to share your voice. I think it's great to make sure that's passion. I don't see anything wrong with people protesting. I don't see anything wrong with people having passion and calling out the egregious behaviors that we're seeing. I heard our Senator Julie Gonzalez say something on a show the other day, and she said people want things to go back to how they were pre-pandemic. And for people of color, things weren't great pre-pandemic. And that really resonated with me when she said that yesterday. I said, I hadn't thought about that. So I totally agree with what Senator Julie Gonzalez said. We can't have things go back to the way they were pre-pandemic. They were not working. So we need to make sure that we're giving power to the people.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sandoval. And just to add to that, people kept saying the new normal. I was like, I don't want normal, I want different. I'll hand it off to Councilwoman CdeBaca.
Yeah, I'll start with the second one first, because I feel like protest is the moment that we're in, and pivoting is important. Pivoting to policy is the next step, because protest is an entry point. And you don't have to be a citizen, you don't have to be 18, you don't have to be an English speaker to be pissed off or affected by something. And so I think that the most important thing that anyone can do is pay attention. A lot of politicians and government has relied on our ignorance and our inability to pay attention to create systems of oppression. And so show up, know what people are, how people are voting, and not just what they're telling you during a campaign season or on a news story. Make sure you're paying attention how they vote on the things you care about. You can show up and testify. You can organize people to testify. You can call your legislators, write to your legislators. You can even propose legislation that we will carry at the city level and at the state level if you're interested and passionate enough. That is not something that is reserved just for us. And anyone can collect enough signatures to get something on a ballot to change the things we don't change. So anyone can do that. Stakeholder groups, we have multiple stakeholder groups for a variety of things, and for our individual offices, anyone can participate in those. Running, that's important, because for communities that didn't trust government or weren't involved in government, it's hard to walk that line and trust the people who represent you. So when you don't trust those people, make sure you find people you can trust, or become that person yourself and run. Help others run campaigns. There's a major campaign that we started years ago at the state legislature to allow young people at the age of 16 to be able to vote on who represents them at the school board. We're going to run that every single year, and we need help to spread the word on that campaign. We've got boards and commissions, and now one of the projects we worked on and piloted at Auraria campus was participatory budgeting. We got city council to adopt that, and now we get to implement that at the city level. And so you all have an opportunity to participate in how we spend a small chunk of money in the city to kind of get your feet wet. So there's no shortage of ways to get involved, learn, and educate others, regardless of what your status is. So all of those are an option. Do them all.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman CdeBaca. It's definitely inspiring, and it's what I always say is, if you don't like who's representing you, then be your own representative and become that person. I hope all the students watching, or young people, anyone feels inspired by this as much as I do, that you can be sitting in those chairs if you don't trust the people in those chairs right now. But you four are making me feel very, very safe and secure with your comments today. We'll finish off with Clerk Lopez, and we kind of got a little over time, but certainly would like to hear your perspective on the matter.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think there's, you know, for those of you who are watching this or may watch this a little later, you have some great representatives here, and they are a reflection of you. They're a reflection of your experiences, of your shared values, of your shared life, and the things that you may care about. At the end of the day, know that that can't happen without your participation. Yes, voting is one of the most popular ways to do it. And I will always tell you, as the clerk and recorder, you better be voting, right? And even know that in the last, you know, presidential election, with so much hype around it, it's so much national focus, right? So much pressure and just weight on it, right? That participation is key. And we popped out at about 86% turnout. It's the second highest in our history, next to 1992, when we were, you know, in the midst of the Iraq War, and you know, you had the Ross Perot, George Bush, Bill Clinton race, right? And Denver was just a lot smaller of a city at that time. However, your participation is key in it. We had 14% that still didn't turn out. And almost every single precinct, we saw turnout. We saw turnout in areas where we wouldn't expect turnout. I had boxes coming in from Montbello precincts that were heavier than the ones in central Denver. We had great participation, and we've actually put people on the ground to do that. So, you know, it was a ship, there was a tide that raised all boats, right? And I think one of the things that we have to, sorry, that's my other thing. One of the things that we have to remind ourselves as well too is that that's for, you know, maybe in Denver, 22 days out of the year. What are you doing the other days of the year? Anybody can participate. Anybody can go door knocking. Anybody can hold a meeting. You don't have to be able to be a citizen or speak English to participate in our democracy. Ustedes pueden participar en cualquier método en la comunidad que siente que le da la gana. Y eso es importante. No hay que ser invisible. We can't be invisible. And that's the one thing I would challenge you all and remind you all not to be. Don't be invisible. Participate in any way you can. Just don't be invisible. And know that you know, it's a science, yes, but it's also an art. And everything that you do, you should ask yourself, what am I doing for my community in the same breath as well too, right? So that would be my thing, is anywhere from, you know, we used to say citizenship to voting, to public service. We want you all to participate in every single aspect. In this country, the government is not a third party. It is we, right? We are the government, but it requires your participation.
Thank you so much, Clerk Lopez. And I hope everybody heard that. So that loud and clear, you know, that we all have a voice, and we've got to make it heard. Todos tenemos voz y tenemos alas para volar. Entonces, ¿por qué no las usamos? I appreciate all of you being here, and I really felt inspired by today's discussion. I'm actually in Mexico right now, but I can't wait to come back to Denver. You make me want to come back even more. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, wonderful rest of your week. We certainly will be hopefully proposing legislation for you, Councilwoman CdeBaca. I hope we do that. Muchas gracias por todo lo que hacen por nuestra comunidad y por nosotros. Thank you so much for what you do for our communities.
And thank you guys for doing this, for moderating this, and for organizing. This is exactly what needs to happen.